Hey everyone, and welcome to this episode of Engineer Your Career. My name is Jess Rush and I'm the sales lead here at Showcode. And today I'm joined by the lovely Joe Reeve from Amplitude, who's going to be sharing a little bit about, well, I say share a little bit, just giving you a bit of an insight into his career that he's developed in tech without having a degree. But before I hand over to him, just wanted to, first of all, welcome you all. If you've been here before, welcome back. If you're new here and you've not actually attended one of these webinars before, welcome. It's lovely to have you here. We host these every other week or so throughout the year, covering all different topics, different journeys, different workshops, and so on. And feel free to check out all of those on our YouTube channel. Regarding what Showcode is, if you've not heard of us at all, so we are a community platform for techies. So whether you're a software engineer, a software developer, a data scientist, an engineering manager, whoever you may be, as long as you have a passion for tech, you could be part of the Showcode community. And we have various sort of pockets of communities within our wider community, not to confuse anyone, but that includes Varsity Code, which is for students, Athena, which is for women and non-binaries, and then our most newest community, which is for more experienced people, which is called Pro Code. But I will share sort of like what you can do in order to get signed up to the community and take part in the various things that we do, whether it be coding competitions, hackathons, workshops, webinars like this, and also community meetups. And you can stay up to date with all of the latest insights as well. So that's a very brief summary of who we are and what we do. I will now hand over to Joe, who will be sharing his story. Please just use the chat function on the right-hand side for any questions and stuff or any feedback. And we'll cover those at the end once Joe has finished his presentation. Thanks so much, Joe.
Cool. Hello, everybody. Great to have you all here. I'm Joe Reeve. I'm an engineering manager at Amplitude. The plan for this session, I thought would be useful for me to sort of go over my career so far with all the good bits. There's sort of thing I might say in an interview, and then we'll go over again. Don't worry, I'll do these quickly. Go over my career again, but focusing on all the things that looking back I did wrong that I would change. And there are obviously things to learn from those. And then I'm going to sort of go through a distilled list of things that I think you should know about a career in software engineering or in tech, and the things that you should do given those things you should know. So that's the plan. We'll kick off with my career, the good bits. I guess the way I would describe myself is that I've got 9 years experience as a product engineer and founder in the data and analytics industry. This is one of those things where we apply a narrative based on my career, which has been lots of different things, but applying a narrative of focusing on the data and analytics industry, which is what I'm doing now. So we can go and pull all the bits from my past there. So my story sort of started, my tech career sort of started when I was about 11, started going to hackathons. A family friend started taking me to hackathons. And this is back when hackathons were very different to what they are now. Back then, hackathons, I was the youngest person by far as an 11-year-old. And most people, probably the second youngest person would be 28, 29. Most of the people that would go would be sort of senior engineers, staff level engineers, really, really senior people. And they would sort of tolerate me. I would show up and poke around, make a bit of a mess on their code, and they would tolerate me and they'd get extra points for having an 11-year-old on their team. This actually, I really sort of learned how to code at hackathons from these senior and staff engineers. And the main thing about learning to code at a hackathon is that it really teaches you to build stuff quickly and in a quick iteration, so you can ship something by the end of the weekend. So that was great. Ended up starting to get good at hackathons. I went to a lot of meetups, attended a lot of meetups, and then started speaking at meetups, and I started running them from the age 11 to 16. So that's sort of how I got into tech. My first sort of foray into working in tech was when I was 15 years old. I picked up some work experience. I don't know if they still do it, but my school had suggested that we do a month of work experience over the summer holidays. So my neighbor down the road, he was a software engineering manager, and he let me sort of come and do some unpaid work experience when I was 15 at Citrix. I think the general expectation is that you do nothing, but because of my hackathon experience, by the time I was 15, I'd been writing code for 4 years in weekends and on my own time during the week. So I actually built a tool that got actually shipped to customers within a month, and it was like a useful tool. So I think that was the point where I realized actually these hackathons that I've been going to were really giving me skills that were sort of surprising people in the real world. I kept on going to hackathons, and one hackathon, one Sunday at the end of the hackathon, I came home to my parents' house and got into this massive argument with my dad because one of the guys that I was on a team with said, "Hey, if I was hiring right now, I would hire you to come and work for me on my team." So I went home to my dad and said, "Hey, look, I could quit school as a 16-year-old and work for a tech company." And my dad said, "No, you need to get a degree. There's no way anyone's going to hire you until you get a degree." So I was angry. I stormed off, and I thought, I'll show him. I'm going to go and apply for jobs online. So, which was maybe a weird sense of rebellion from a 16-year-old. So I applied for jobs, and then the next day on my way to college, I was studying computer games development at college at BTech. And I got a phone call from a guy called Ray, who I've worked with many, many times over the last few years. He called me up and said, "Hey, do you want to come in for an interview?" So instead of going to college, to school, I went to his offices. He said, sit there, and instead of interviewing me, he just said, "Sit down, go and work on this, and I'll decide if you can come back tomorrow at the end of the day." And then I ended up going back. He ended up asking me to come back the next day. Unfortunately, so I got the job basically, but unfortunately the company went bust about a month after I joined. So it was an interesting start, a little bit of a false start, but it really sort of built my confidence up and made me know that I want to start my own company at some point. So after that, I sort of decided, well, maybe I want to go and travel in Australia a little bit. So I got a job that I knew I could do as an IT support guy support person at a school. So I was 16 years old, and some of the students were older than me, bigger than me. I was basically resetting passwords and things. But working at a school as an IT support person really helped me sort of understand how real humans use computers, not just software engineers and nerds, and really taught me about empathy in support, and actually got me sort of doing some really high stakes debugging and practicing these things. Because when you've got 30 people staring at you while you try and fix something, and you've got an anxious teacher whose projector is not working, you really have to start sort of dealing with that pressure quite quickly. And a lot of the time it forces you to go back to basics for debugging, because the projector's not working because your laptop's not plugged in. So there's that level of debugging, but really taught me a lot while I was saving up for Australia. Then after 6 months there, I ended up going to Australia. And while I was in Australia, I through my uncle, I picked up some work at Compumedics, which is where my uncle worked at the time. This is literally brain science. I was building software that read ECGs and EEG scans, which is sort of what they do when they want to look at your brain, when doctors want to understand what's going on in your brain. So I basically chilled out in Melbourne and did a little bit of work for Compumedics, which was pretty good fun, learning all about brain science basically and software for medical tech. Then I came back to the UK, and through my previous Citrix work experience, got a referral to a company called Squared Up. I was employee number maybe less than 10, maybe 7 or 8. So really early in this company's life cycle. I was basically their only front-end developer, their lead front-end developer. And still at the point where I got this job, I was still 17 years old, so very early in my career. But I picked up a lot from the hackathons and the various different jobs I'd had. Through that, I got the chance to run a meetup for hiring. So I had a budget to run a meetup, which was great, rather than just doing it in the pub and trying to get other people to buy me drinks. I was able to actually work at a proper company. This wasn't done through recruiters or I didn't even have a CV at this point. Just done through talking to people I knew. And then after 2 years at Squared Up, I thought it was time for a change. And MetDesk was actually the first time in my career I found a job with a CV and through a recruiter. So I put together a pretty janky CV and sent it out. And I basically had the choice between joining this company, MetDesk, or some other company, I forget the name now. But it was a very highly effective engineering, or very senior engineers, and they were going to teach me lots of things, and that's what they sort of sold the job to me as. And I had the choice: either join MetDesk, where I was going to be the person that knew the most about the stuff we were doing, or join this other organization where I would know the least and I'd be taught lots. And I opted to go to MetDesk, where I thought I would learn and grow from being able to show this company what some of the best practices could be. So while I was here, I introduce a bunch of best practices like source control and test environments, which sound fairly simple. Like you don't want to necessarily be editing the production, the live application while people are using it, but that's what they were doing before I joined. I was working on life critical systems, again, similar to the medical stuff. This is like how fast trains are going. Do we grip the road so people die if we get these things wrong? So again, more high pressure, high stake stuff. And I was just 19 years old when I was doing this, which was quite a lot of pressure, I think, to put on a 19-year-old. But hey, and they didn't have any front-end developers until I joined. So I sort of brought in all the sort of stuff you might expect from a front-end product. I built we didn't have React really around that time. So I built a framework similar to React internally, and we used that. And I sort of rebuilt one of their projects that had been delayed for 6 months before I even joined. And I rebuilt it from scratch within 3 months. And by the time I left the company, it was worth about 30% of their revenue. So MetDesk, great opportunity for growth for me there. I was there for about 2 years. While I was still at MetDesk, I became a trustee of a charity called Lighthouse Hazelmere. So we have a week in summer where we have over 1,000 sort of under 12-year-olds, and then about 500 volunteers who are between 13 years old and 99 years old, maybe even older than that, I'm not sure. And I became a trustee, which is like being a director of the charity. So yeah, this is when I was 19, and I led 2 different teams as part of that. I managed 12 people, so that was my first real chance of experiencing management, and it was very much being thrown in the deep end. It was a lot of fun, and I learned a lot. So after MetDesk, and this is sort of in between the Lighthouse pieces, I quit MetDesk so I could start my own consulting business when I was 20. And I actually kept MetDesk as a client. I worked for them 2 days a week. And I worked with some other charities, some other organizations like the RSPB, which is a big environmental charity, and QX, which is affiliated with Wikipedia, the Wikimedia Foundation. And so this took me out to Kenya to go and help schools use technology to help bring more recent educational content. So this was great. I got to travel, I got to work with charities, businesses, and open source projects, which was awesome. So then after consulting for about a year, a friend called me up, actually a friend from when I worked at MetDesk. He lived in Hungary, still does. And he invited me to come out to Hungary because him and a few friends were thinking of starting a company, and they wanted to see if I wanted to join with them and help them start the company. So I became the founder and CTO of a company called Della in Hungary for about a year. I led a team of 3 product engineers there. We shipped 4 native mobile apps, 2 on Android and 2 on iOS, and we sort of started a bunch of, basically built a company from the ground up there. Unfortunately, startups, the sort of truism is that startups don't die, they commit suicide. So 2 of my colleagues, my co-founders, fell out, and then the whole business sort of deteriorated. But once the company sort of fell apart, I decided I was pretty frustrated because I spent a year of my life building stuff that never actually saw the light of day and didn't have any positive impact on the world. So I decided when I went back to the UK, I decided I wanted to do something positive. So I went to a friend that I'd won a hackathon with previously and asked if I could, in the news industry, and asked if I could take that project that we built and turn that into a business. And he said, well, instead of doing that, why don't you run your own hackathon? So this was my first hackathon that I had the opportunity to run. And this friend sort of pushed me into it. He said, oh, well, I know this other guy that has a venue that he might let you use for free. I said, great. So I went and visited him in East London and said, can I use your venue for free? And he said, yes. And then he said, why don't you come upstairs and have a coffee? So there's this house upstairs. And he makes me a coffee and says, yes, you can use the venue. Would you like to move into this house? And I looked at him and I was thinking, I don't know you. I met you 15 minutes ago. Why are you asking to move into your house? And I said, I'll think about it. Basically meaning I want to use the venue for free. So I don't want to say no to you, but I don't want to live in your house. And then about a week later, I bumped into him in Stockholm at a conference, and he said, so are you moving into the house then? And I said, well, yeah, sure, why not? Which I wasn't expecting. So that's how I came to be at Newspeak House, which I later learned is sort of another name for the London College of Political Technology. So this is all about technology for politics, but also social good stuff. So I was a fellow. I completed a fellowship for about a year at Newspeak House. So sort of a qualification. And meanwhile, I was studying basically community building as part of that fellowship, and I ran Hack the Press, the hackathons. I ran a few hackathons and a few meetups there, and created a few projects like the Election Tech Handbook, which was another cool project that happened there. This is all when I was about 21 years old. Then, sort of overlapping with that, when I became 22 years old, I founded another company called Gived. We built loads of different projects, about 5 different products in total, and this sort of overlapped with COVID a little bit. They got used by millions of people around the world. We got funding from the UK government and the US grant funders, but I burnt out working too hard over COVID, and then ended up joining a company called Iteratively, which was a US-based startup. I joined as about employee number 7, so a bit of a theme here, sort of joining companies early on in the startup life cycle, which is what the hackathon vibe really makes easy. About a month after we joined, we raised a Series A, and then a couple months after that, I shipped a brand new rebuild of their UI, which was a project I was leading. And then a few months after that, we got acquired by a company called Amplitude, which is where I work now. A month after we got acquired, Amplitude announced a Series F, so that was very quick. This is raising money, the startup life cycle, so we went from Series A to Series F in less than a year. And then a couple of months after that, we IPO'd, so we went public, which is sort of the goal for any startup, or most startups. So we IPO'd, and so that was a real whistle-stop tour. I learned so much from joining a startup before Series A and then IPOing within a year and a bit, which was pretty amazing. So then I ran a few of the big technical projects there. I founded the London engineering team for Amplitude. So I'm in the Amplitude office right now, and there are a few London engineers here. I was given the opportunity to hire here, and I think Sam Larson Disney, who's on the call, I met at one of the hackathons I ran, and we employed him through that, and as part of that, running the AI R&D team, which is all very exciting. So that's my career so far, all the good bits. So now I'm just going to go over and sort of do all the fun bits, really, all the ways in which I sort of look back and I cringe, and this is a little bit hard to do. So appreciate your bearing with me on some of this. So basically, this is now my career, but with all the screw-ups included. So when I was at Squared Up, I had this real confidence, and this was when I was 17 to 19 years old. I had this real ego on me, and I had this real confidence that I knew what good code was. And in reality, good code is code that can be read and understood and maintained by other people. But I didn't really get that. I said, the code I write is good code, and the code everybody else writes is bad code. I didn't invest in relationships with my colleagues, and then I was surprised when I didn't get to be part of the cliques and all the fun work, like extracurricular things. I just didn't get on with people, and I didn't try. And I took work really personally. I think it's important to take work seriously, but I took it very personally. So whenever someone reported a bug in something I'd built, I took it as a personal attack, a personal failure, rather than something that's just standard to be expected. So that made things really quite hard, I think, for me as a relatively junior software engineer, just trying to sort of figure out how to be productive in a company. So those are mistakes I made at Squared Up. And sort of eventually those are the things that led to me wanting to move on to another role. Sorry for the blurry image here. The Lighthouse Hazelmere, the charity that I was a trustee of, I was there for about 3 years, but I was not good at building consensus. I knew things that I wanted to do, and I did achieve some really good outcomes, but I did it through bulldozing and saying, I'm going to do the thing I want to do, move out my way. And I wasn't very good at building consensus. And in some environments that works well, but in charities where you tend to have quite slow-moving organizations and people that the other trustees tend to be people that really like to do things the way they do them, and they're just doing it as volunteers, that really sort of upset a lot of my colleagues there. So I ended up resigning and was on bad terms with a couple of them, which was not a great place to be. And I was starting to notice there's a little bit of a pattern in my own behavior where I wasn't focusing on building these relationships. Thankfully, that wasn't a problem at MetDesk, that specific problem. But actually, my first mistake with MetDesk came before I even accepted the job. I mentioned earlier that I was sort of had to choose between 2 jobs, MetDesk and this other one. I had actually previously accepted the other one before I'd even interviewed at the MetDesk job. So I'd accepted the other job, and then I took the MetDesk interview, and I thought, actually, I'd prefer to be there. And instead of being straight up to the recruiter, which I absolutely should have done, and just said, I've got a better offer, sorry. I liked the recruiter, and I said, I can't remember exactly what I said, but I liked the recruiter because I felt bad sort of changing my mind. So that was my first mistake with Metdesk. And then I mentioned earlier that I built this thing that was a little bit like React. It was this UI framework. Basically, what I've done is reinvented the wheel. There were other things out there that we could have used, but I invented my own version and then imposed it on everybody else at the company rather than finding some off-the-shelf thing, which meant that maintaining and hiring people was quite hard because we didn't have any keywords we could use to make sure people knew what they were looking for, and people had to maintain some custom code, which was quite complex and messy. And then I also made a really bad referral, someone I knew really wouldn't be a good fit, but I kind of wanted to work with them anyway because I got on with them, and that ended badly. And then once after I'd left the company, I made another mistake. So lots of mistakes around here. This isn't to say I didn't learn a lot from the job and do some things right, but I ended on bad terms with my boss. I sort of sent a message to one of my boss's colleagues saying sort of some of the reasons I thought that my boss wasn't the right person for that role, which was just completely unnecessary and just like a real mistake that I made. But again, 19-year-old ego. So when I was consulting, maybe earlier I made this sound cool, like I was doing stuff in Kenya and I was working with lots of different companies and charities and having a really good impact on the world. Really, this was me sort of being a 20-year-old dossing around, not really achieving all that much. I lacked a lot of focus, and it took quite a lot of different friends and mentors to really push me in the right direction and say, look, you've got to pick up and point in the right direction, point in one direction, and actually do something that's going to matter in 2 years' time. So throughout this, I was really lacking focus, and that was the key problem there, which will pop up a couple of times. When I was at Dell, one of the big mistakes I made there, and I think we could have held the team together and really made that business successful, but I was thinking, I'm the CTO, I'm building tech, sales isn't my job, I'm not going to get involved in that, I'm not going to get involved in hiring, I'm just going to focus on building good tech. And what we did was we spent 7 months building apps, and then we shipped them all at once, and we should have shipped them much, much earlier in much smaller increments, so we could have learned from them, and we just sort of ended up with a product that wasn't quite right because we didn't learn from it quickly enough, and the team wasn't as cohesive as it should have been, which is why 2 of my co-founders ended up falling out. I didn't see that as my job, which was a mistake. Then when I left that finished and I went to Newspeak House, again, I lacked focus. This was sort of a halfway house for me. I spent a year here doing all sorts of random stuff, which I learned a lot, but really I lacked focus and I didn't really have a good idea of what I was trying to do. Similar thing here with Gift as well, but also similar to Dello. It took me 2 attempts here to learn what the mistake here was. I was focusing on the tech. I wasn't thinking about the other things that mattered. I wasn't talking to my customers. I wasn't focused on sales. I wasn't worried about the legal implications of the things I was doing. And I really over-indexed on disrupting rather than partnering. I didn't focus enough on building connections and bringing people together. Just focused on trying to like make sure that we move fast and do things. And now here at Iteratively and Amplitude, which is where I am, I will say that I think it's hard when you're in the moment to see exactly what the mistakes are in clarity. I think if I had to guess what they would be, with Iteratively, before we were acquired, I was focused on shipping fast because I didn't want to make that same mistake again. But that meant that I sort of over-indexed on shipping fast and under-indexed, didn't focus enough on making sure the things I was shipping were of high quality. And that's a really big deal, particularly when you're working with big customers that care about how things look and feel. When you're working with lots of designers, and actually one of the founders of Iteratively is a designer, so that mattered a lot. And we worked that out and moved on, and I learned from that within Iteratively, but that was one of the things that I learned there. And then at Amplitude, one of the things here, there's always so much to do, so it's really making sure that you're focused, or for me at least, making sure that I'm focusing on stuff and driving the things that actually matter rather than working on 100 different things. So that's the sort of mistakes I made in my career. I sort of distilled some of the things, and these are sort of separate, sort of orthogonal to those bits. So I hope that sort of helps my career, the good bits and the screw-ups. I hope that's sort of helpful for understanding that you can have things that sound all good on the outside, just like the Instagram effect, but really there are a lot of mistakes that went on there, and a lot of them that sort of forced those things to end earlier than maybe they could have otherwise. So things that I really think matter to know, and then I'm going to cover something that you can do for each of these. So the first thing to know, managing up is really underrated. You've probably heard the term managing up. This is about making sure you manage the relationship with your manager and understanding what your manager wants you to do and what you can get your manager to do, because your manager is there to serve you in the end. This is really underrated and a thing that's definitely worth reading up on. The specific thing that I recommend you do, and this question is probably responsible for about 50% of my career growth at least. Just ask your boss, what can I do to help you? What can I help you with? And this is, if you've got capacity to do extra stuff, rather than just going and working on some random thing, ask, what's the most important thing to you, boss, who's got more view of the world and a better understanding of the business. What can I help you with that's going to make your life easier? And that's honestly been a massive deal for my career growth. So I recommend you do that regularly, daily, weekly. Second thing to know, job descriptions, total scam. If I hear someone saying, that's not my job, so I'm not going to do it, that to me is a red flag. Your job is to do what needs doing, not to do what's in your job description. A really good book I recommend that sort of helped me understand this, this will come up a couple of times, is a book called The Goal by Eli Goldratt. That your job is to help the business make money. It's not to go and write code. It's not to design something. It's not to write documents. Your job is to make the business money. And someone says, we think this is probably the best way you're going to achieve that. And your manager is probably going to say this is the best way to achieve that. But really, in reality, your job is to make the business money. So bear that in mind. A really practical way to do this is when you're given a problem, make sure you're a problem solver, not a problem transformer. So a problem transformer is someone that when they're given a problem, they'll start to solve it, and then they'll come back and say, oh, well, I hit this problem. So they'll take a problem, and then they'll turn that into another problem, and they give that problem back to their boss. A problem solver is someone that gets given a problem, and then they go, and when they hit the next roadblock, they solve that one. And then when they hit the next roadblock, they solve that one. So don't let a single problem send you back to your boss. And you want to be very transparent about this and that you're hitting these problems and doing these things. Otherwise, your boss will think, what on earth is that person doing? I asked them to go and do this simple thing a week ago and they still haven't done it. You want to be transparent about the fact that you're hitting roadblocks, but be a transformer. And this is sometimes thought of as the don't tell me a problem unless you know a solution. So make sure you're sort of actually trying to solve these problems properly and deeply, not just turning them into new problems that are going to either a new problem immediately or a problem that's going to rear its head in a week's time. And the whole thing here is just don't allow yourself to be blocked by anybody else. Another thing to know, it's not about code, it's about outcomes. The most important things I've done for businesses have not been the code, even when I've been a software engineer by trade. It's all about what outcomes are you achieving? Are you making the company money? Are you making the companies happy? Are the customers happy? And again, The Goal is a really good book to read for this one. Things you can do here. One is practice shipping. A lot of the time people spend ages perfecting their code, figuring out what cool things they could build. But really, the customer's not seeing any of that value because you're perfecting it, so it's not in their hands. And they're not testing it and breaking it and figuring out how to use it. So practice shipping, and hackathons are a really good way to do this. And I think Athena Hack is in July. The Showcode hackathon is coming up. So practice shipping, ship stuff regularly. Do it in a hackathon. If you build a side project, put it on a domain name, go and figure out how to do that once, and then you'll know how to do it the next time. And now for me, it feels really uncomfortable for me to write code and not ship it the same day, which sometimes is something I need to fight that feeling. But really practice shipping, and then this previous, it's not about code, it's about outcomes piece is going to get much, much less of a problem. Another thing to do here is to only write code when you understand how it's going to help. So make sure you understand why you're writing the code, why the code is going to be valuable. Don't just write code for fun. I mean, definitely write code for fun, but when you're trying to create value for a business, for your work, you want to be understanding how that code is going to help. And then when you're not writing code, spend the rest of the time figuring out what you could do that's going to help. Focus on the customers and focus on solving problems and making the company money, because that's what your job is at the end. This one, I think lots of people like saying this. the tech industry is changing super fast, but in reality, it doesn't change that fast. I mean, there's a lot of churn at the top level, like all the libraries are changing and the whatever. But in reality, so I was talking to my dad a few years ago. My dad used to be a software engineer 30 years ago, and I was saying all this cool DevOps stuff, which a lot of you may have heard of, DevOps, CI/CD, and he said, "Oh, that sounds like something we were doing 30 years ago." And I was saying, no, it's not the same because this is brand new. And we sat down and I showed him. And he said, yeah, okay, this is the word I would use to describe that. And we Googled it, and it's like, yeah, okay, this is a 30-year-old design pattern that we've just like reinvented with new words. So this is a really key thing I think that I learned was that really the base things in tech doesn't change that fast, and there's just like a lot of churn and people reinventing the wheel, and it's easy to get distracted by that. And the thing to do here actually is reinvent the wheel yourself. And this, I don't mean reinvent it and maybe, sure, share it with other people, but not necessarily reinvent the wheel so that you're creating more churn, but reinvent the wheel so that you understand the actual deep problems. So rather than learning a little bit of React and then learning a little bit of Ember and then a little bit of Svelte or something, where they all feel very different, go create your own version of React. It doesn't have to be a fully featured version. There are tutorials out there for creating your own VDOM libraries. And then you understand why React is built the way it is and why hooks work or why they don't work, and why to use function components or when to use function components, when to use class components. Not because you know React really well, but because you know the problems it's trying to solve. So then that all makes sense. And actually even more recently, so that's how I learned a lot about React, was by building this React alternative when I was at MetDesk. But more recently, even just a month ago, I was looking at all the ChatGPT stuff, the LLMs, is what they're known as behind the scenes, trying to learn about this. And there's this tool called LangChain, which helps you build apps on top of LLMs. And I was playing around with this, and I was thinking, I really don't get this. It's really taking ages to learn. So I thought, well, let me just do what I normally do, and I'll rebuild LangChain, even though I don't understand it. So I started looking at the code, and I just rebuilt my own version in a different programming language. And within a few hours, I'd actually gotten to the crux of what I didn't understand, not by building the whole fully featured alternative to LangChain, but just by starting to build it, I suddenly understood the problems it was trying to solve. So this is really helpful for me even now, reinventing the wheel, rebuilding things that already exist, so you understand the core problems they're trying to solve. And the other thing to do here is just practice learning. Learning is a skill. Just learn things for fun, be curious, play around with new frameworks and tools. And actually, hackathons are another really good example of doing this, a really good opportunity to do this. Find other people that have learned stuff, learn what they're learning, and they can help you. But just practice learning, practice picking up new things and digging deep into existing things, because it'll be hard the first time, it'll be hard the second time, the third time it's going to be way easier, I promise. So another thing to know, ambition is really rare, but it's also really contagious. And if you feel ambitious within your work and you think, right, I want to get promoted, I want to get promoted twice, I want to get promoted 3 times, then that's a really important thing. And it's important that everybody around you also feels that, and they need to feel it for you. And equally, if you don't feel very ambitious and you want to, and you sort of wish you were feeling more ambitious, I really recommend finding somebody that is ambitious and just hanging out with them. Spend time with them, see what you can do to help them. And to begin with, you won't be feeling it all that much, but you'll slowly start to get that ambition, sort of absorb that ambition. And again, hackathons are a great place for people that are ambitious to hang out. So go and absorb some of their ambition and get that contagious ambition with yourself. So one of the things to do here is, if you are feeling ambitious, be ambitious on behalf of everyone around you. Expect more from everyone around you. Encourage them to expect more from themselves. This is a really important thing, I think, to get any team that you're on to be ambitious and high performing. So I really recommend be ambitious on behalf of everyone around you. This one may be easy for me to say after I've just told you all of my mistakes. A perfect track record is a sign that you're not trying hard enough. I only mean semi-seriously. If you've never missed a flight, maybe you're arriving at the airport too late. Too early. So a little bit of error, a little bit of mistake makes sense. If you're not creating any bugs, you're probably not writing any code. So it's totally fine to make mistakes, and it shows that you're trying and you're pushing your own barriers. And if you're not making mistakes, just like when I was doing my contracting, where I was sort of lacking focus and not really trying very hard, I was just sort of dusting off. If you're not making mistakes, you're not cracking eggs, you're probably not making omelets. So definitely have a think about that for yourself. If you're not accidentally upsetting people, maybe you're not being strongly convicted enough. If you're not creating bugs in your job, maybe you're not building software fast enough, because bugs are a normal part of work, part of life. So the key thing here is that when things go wrong, you know what to do. And this pattern, I learned it from someone, and I forget who now, but I learned it from someone years ago, and I really recommend this. If something goes wrong, there's a bug or anything, you make a mistake, you upset someone, explain what happened very clearly, apologize and accept the responsibility, and then explain what you're going to do to make sure it doesn't happen again. And this is a really, really helpful, powerful tool that I found turns everyone from CEOs to my sister, makes CEOs and sisters, makes them all suddenly happy and forgive you very, very easily. Because you're being genuine, you're accepting the responsibility, and then you're explaining what you're going to do to make sure it doesn't happen again. So I really recommend that. Really powerful. Another thing to know, humans really fear uncertainty. This is just like a cognitive bias, a thing that humans are wired to fear. Uncertainty is horrible. So make sure you over-communicate rather than under-communicate. If you think you're not sure about sending a message because it might be too much noise, then just send it anyway. If you're ever worried that you might not have shared enough information, then you've got to go and share a lot more information, just so people understand what you're working on, where you are, how you're feeling even. Emotions are hard to communicate. So definitely I recommend over-communicate rather than under-communicate. And that really helps with this fear of uncertainty, and it'll make people feel more comfortable around you. At least it does for me. The last thing to know, hiring is actually really difficult and boring. I've done quite a bit of hiring now, interviewing. It's difficult and boring, and the thing to do here is be memorable in your CV, in your interviewing. I guess probably maybe many other people on this call are thinking about starting to interview or are actively interviewing. The hiring manager wants you to be the one. When they log on to that interview, they want you to be the one. They're not trying to trick you out. So be memorable and surface your uniqueness and unique things you can give to the company, and they'll remember you. When I was at Squared Up, we were reviewing CVs for interns, and one of the interns, he had put on his CV that that when he was at university, he took pole dancing lessons, which was a really random, funny thing. And we were thinking, why on earth would you put that on your CV? But then for the next 2 weeks while we were reviewing CVs, we kept on mentioning, oh yeah, that pole dancing intern. And it was really funny, a bit silly, but we remembered him. And I still remember him now. I remember working with him. I remember his name, and I remember looking at CVs, other people's CVs, but remembering him, not them. So be memorable, surface your uniqueness, add a little bit of whimsy. I know Sam Larson Disney, he posted a great thing on LinkedIn about his sort of demoing what that might look like for a CV. So that's everything from the things to know and do. If you're interested, feel free to follow me on Twitter or find me on LinkedIn. I'm very happy to answer any other questions, and can answer questions now, or if you think of anything else later, happy to answer questions another time. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Joe. That was great. Sorry, I think it's taking a little time for my thing to kick back in, but no, that was really awesome. I love that point about being ambitious for everyone else, because I think that's something sometimes some people may feel like when they're ambitious in themselves, that they then try to maybe quieten it down a bit because they realize some people around them may not feel quite as ambitious. But I think that's so great, like that sort of team player side of it. In terms of hackathons, I know between you and Sam, you're obviously huge hackathon advocates. What's been your favorite one that you've gone to personally?
The one I enjoyed the most personally, and this may sound a little bit silly, it's not because it was the best one I've ever been to, but the one I personally enjoyed the most was the last one that I was involved in running. It was Hack the Press one. And that was because I started Hack the Press. It was just me, and I was sort of aimless, didn't really know what to do. and it was just me sort of pushing really hard, putting loads of energy into this thing. And now it's sort of self-sustaining. All the hackathons without doing any advertising, they fill up. And the last one, I had two great friends came and helped me run it, and I basically had to do nothing. And I was wandering around this hackathon, watching everybody else having fun, these other guys having fun organizing the hackathon, like with me, but sort of mostly for me, or instead of me. And I was able to really enjoy that hackathon and that community that I'd spent a lot of effort building, and then suddenly it felt like actually everybody else was getting an opportunity to enjoy it without me having to sort of push and try and encourage people to enjoy it. So personally, that was great. That was a great moment for me, where I realized this isn't me anymore. This is like a group of people that care about this stuff. It's not just mental.
Oh no, that's really great. And with the obviously you started so young, like obviously your story, there's not many 16-year-olds that just obviously have the career or go on to have the career that you've had. So were you always sort of confident in your abilities, or did you ever sort of have any sort of like imposter syndrome? Obviously that's been talked a lot about in recent years.
Yeah, I mean, to me, imposter syndrome is like a natural thing. Everybody feels it. I feel it now, right? I think everybody feels it, and if they don't feel it, they're either, in my view, they're probably either lying or a complete sociopath. So I think imposter syndrome is a super normal thing, and that maybe even I feel it potentially more strongly than other people, and that's why I push really hard. And since I was 16, I was trying to prove myself. And I think imposter syndrome is a healthy feeling, and if it's used correctly, if you harness that and push and use that to motivate you to push for what you want. And obviously it can get to a point that it's really unhealthy if you let it sort of simmer inside. But I mean, I think throughout my whole life I thought, well, I could have done that better, and that's what this is, right? Like, all the mistakes I wish I didn't make, and I wish I learned that earlier. But
it's nice when you're actually at that point when you can reflect on those like younger years when you're like between 16 and like 24, and you go, oh my gosh, I'm surprised like I'm still able to be employed by some of the things that I've done in the past. But I mean, you have to have that. You have to have those years, as you said, where you do make those mistakes, and you'll continue to make mistakes. And that's the reason, though, that you end up having the career you end up having. So, did you? I mean, I don't know from your side, but I've like before, like noticed sort of ageism within the workplace. Is that something you ever encountered in your space?
So one of the interesting things I found was that early on in my career, being a 16-year-old, 17-year-old was actually really quite helpful. And this, I know it doesn't necessarily apply to other people, but being a 16-year-old, whenever I walked into the room, everybody would be like, oh, it's the 16-year-old genius. And I was no genius. Still I'm not. I was not a great software engineer. I was a 16-year-old that had just learned how to code at hackathons. I'd not really had any I'd had absolutely zero formal training and not had a lot of experience working with other senior engineers. So I was not a good software engineer at the age of 16. But everybody sort of overrated how good I was because I was young and able to cobble stuff together. And then, so I have noticed that actually that boost I had earlier on, I've got less of now. But I do think that the focus on outcomes is the most important thing, because you could be, suffering any kind of, maybe not any kind of, but like many types of things that people may want to push you down. Maybe, and I've upset plenty of people in my career and not invested enough in relationships and had that to a degree. Certainly not to a massive degree, but I've certainly had it. That if you're achieving outcomes and you're focusing on making the business money, then they have no leg to stand on. So I would say, regardless of yes, all this stuff is bad and should be tackled by businesses, all the sort of negative, whether it's ageism or sexism or racism or anything, that's obviously bad and is not acceptable. We shouldn't be accepted by you or by anyone else at the company. But if you're achieving outcomes, then all it does is make the other people look stupid. If someone's saying, oh, they can't do that because of X or Y, they can't do that because they're a woman, and then you go and do it, it makes you look great and them look stupid. So focus on the outcomes, and hopefully we can change the world that way.
Oh, I love that. That's really great. And I love that your dad was like, yeah, we had all of this 30 years ago, because there's so much talk, as you say, and noise about this, there's like AI, and like, obviously these things are evolving, but it's interesting that actually at the base of it, not much has changed in quite a long time.
Yeah, you do get things like with the AI, the LLMs, ChatGPT. That does seem like quite a big shift, but in reality, it's not that we've invented some new tech, that there's some brand new way to do something. It's actually just incremental changes on things that we've been doing since the 80s, 90s. It's the same papers, right? That are just being, hey, we've got more CPUs and GPUs now, excuse me, and more data. So let's see what happens if we spend $1 million on it instead of $100,000. So, I mean, again, it's still incremental changes, but you get these massively increased outcomes at the end.
Yeah, no, it's interesting to hear that, because, as I say, yeah, there is definitely evolving things happening at the moment. But it's interesting that like the core stuff that most people being taught and so on, it's pretty much what it was all those years ago. And just touching on that, I suppose, just to finish off, what are your sort of thoughts about what's happening in the tech space at the moment regarding like machine learning, AI? Obviously, ChatGPT is getting sued left, right, and centre at the moment. So, what are your thoughts on it? Do you think it's obviously going to be better, but like, what has been your experience so far, and what do you think is going to happen over the next few years?
So, I think the concept of writing code is going to change quite a lot in the next 5 years. I think instead of writing lines of code, most software engineers are going to be writing prompts that then create code. And then you compose those and getting to understand a little bit of the code. But what I would say there is it's actually even more important to be able to read and understand code than it is right now, because it's going to be easier for more people to create code.
Yeah.
And you're going to have lots of people creating broken things because they don't quite understand what's going on. So it makes it even more important to be able to actually understand the code that these models are creating. So from a coding point of view, use them. They're going to make you 10 times more effective. Play around with Copilot, play around with ChatGPT and all the other tools. I would warn against being reliant on one over the others, because they're all sort of competing and getting better at different speeds. So who knows which ones are going to be around in 5 years' time? But definitely use them. Definitely let them make you 10 times more effective, because otherwise, why not?
Yeah, no, it's perfect. Well, thank you so much. I haven't had any further questions, so we can wrap up at that point. It's been really, really great hearing your experience. I think there's so many people that are sort of still unsure whether they should be going to get a degree or should they just be trying to do it themselves. And obviously you can show what you can do through the use of other means as teaching yourself. And I say the hackathons, obviously we're huge ambassadors for them. I know you are, and so is Sam. So if anyone's watching not been to a hackathon before, do check them out. There's lots available across different platforms. Showcode, we run them, so you can create your profile at showcode.io. Or it hasn't hyperlinked it, but just put that site in and it will come up. And you've got other platforms as well out there, such as DevPost and so on, which has loads of other hackathon events. So thank you so much, Joe. It's been great having you. Look forward to seeing you at the hack in July. And I think you said you were going to pop in. So I'm sure I will see you there. I will be there the whole weekend. So whenever you are there, make sure you come say hi this time, because I missed you last time.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to it. It'd be great.
Perfect. Well, enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll catch up with you very soon. See you later. Bye.